Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the National Eating Disorders Association's Parent, Family, and Friends webinar series. Today, we are presenting Writing Through Stress and Shame, Taking Our Power Back. My name is Ellen Domingos. I'm the Community Outreach Specialist here at NEDA, and we're so pleased to have with us today our wonderful presenter, Carolyn Jennings. And I'd like to take a moment briefly introduce her. Carolyn Jennings has lived in recovery from binge eating for over 20 years. One of her steadfast tools is writing as a way of knowing herself separate from and stronger than disordered eating. Author of the award-winning Hunger Speaks, a memoir told in poetry, a celebration of recovery from an eating disorder, and a journal to the self certified instructor, she brings writing practices to others who are in or seeking recovery, including at the Eating Disorder Foundation's Support Center. Hi, Carolyn. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, Ellen. Thank you.
Okay, so before we get started, and I pass it over to Carolyn, we just wanted to tell everyone that this is an exercise that's intended to provide additional tools for self-care. It's not in any way to be construed as a substitute for therapy. We do hope that you find the writing experience and the tools enjoyable and beneficial, but just want to stress that this is not a substitute for therapy. Okay, all right, Carolyn, I will hand it over to you.
All right, thank you, Ellen. And I'd like to take a minute to thank NEDA for this opportunity to put together this webinar. And thank you out there who are listening and hopefully writing along soon. I'm very glad to be here. Let's take a quick look at the agenda for today. The first part of the webinar will be about a summary of the research that links writing to better physical and mental health. And then we'll go into the writing portion, which is the longer portion of the webinar. I'll go over what the writing guidelines are. And then the 5 techniques we'll cover today are short lists, writing sprints, character sketches, dialogues, and alpha poems. And then at the very end, we'll cover additional resources. I'd like to start by talking about the purpose of this workshop. As I was putting it together, I was thinking about stress and shame and reading the work of the wonderful writer and vulnerability researcher Brene Brown, and I came across this quote. Brene writes, "Shame derives its power from being unspeakable. If we cultivate enough awareness about shame to name it and speak to it, we've basically cut it off at the knees. Language and story bring light to shame and destroy it." My experience with shame and also with stress is similar to what Brene talks about. I find that shame and stress can be like a voice in the back of my head telling me their story. It's so repetitious, it seems believable. But if I turn around and face the stress or the shame, it sort of shrivels up. Its power decreases. And so the writing tools that I'm going to bring to you today are, I believe, a chance to do just exactly that. That is my intention. So today we'll really be looking at 2 views of the value of writing. Again, we'll start with a summary of research results on the connection between writing and health. There's a certain type of expressive writing that has been shown in many ways to improve physical and mental health. And then the second, and again longer portion of the webinar, will be your own writing experience today. And I think that's really the most important, because I can talk about all the statistics in the world, but your experience of writing will determine whether you want to take these tools and use them in the future. And you will want to have some writing tools available for later in the webinar, whether that's old-fashioned pen and paper or any sort of keyboard, whatever you like to write on. Please have that ready. So we'll start by looking at writing research and what the basic premise is. when Dr. James Pennebaker and some others started doing some research into the health effects of writing back in the 1980s, they had proof that having any type of traumatic experience is associated with elevated illness rates. And further, that having any trauma and not talking about it continues to elevate that risk. The risk is higher if you keep the trauma inside yourself. And that was how they began to devise their first experiment to do some research on. So let me talk for just a moment about trauma. It's actually proven that the majority of people deal with traumatic experiences, and of course it's distressing, but they deal with it without major changes in their future mental or physical health. That said, there is still a long history in psychology and in medicine linking traumatic experiences with subsequent physical and mental health problems. And what is it about trauma that influences health? There can be intense and long-lasting emotional changes, and we all know that strong emotions affect our physical and mental health. There can be cognitive disruption as people struggle to understand what happened and why, and perhaps keep reliving the traumatic incident to try to make sense of it, to try and put it in some sort of perspective. But this can take energy away from other mental processes that we need to get through our days. Trauma can cause disruptions in people's social networks. Sometimes people feel shame and hide the trauma and don't speak about it to the people they know. Sometimes they try to speak about it to people, but people may not be able to hear them very well or to offer them what they need. So it can disrupt social connections. And all of this can lead to lifestyle changes. People may start smoking or drinking. They may exercise too much or too little. It can affect changes in sleep and in eating patterns. And those most susceptible to these changes in physical and mental health after a trauma are individuals who are reactive to novel stimuli, people who are highly anxious, people who are avoidant, people who are self-blaming. So with that as our introduction, let's take a look at that first study that was done in 1986 by two researchers named Pennebaker and Beal. So the participants for this study were college students. The college students showed up for the study and were randomly assigned to write about a trauma or about superficial topics for 4 days for 15 minutes per day. So in other words, X number of students showed up for the experiment. Half of them were going to look at some significant trauma or stressor in their lives, and the other half wrote about superficial topics like how they were using their time that day. And I'd like to emphasize for a moment here that this experiment was for 4 days at 15 minutes per day. So we're talking an hour total. In subsequent experiments that have been done, sometimes it's been 10 minutes at a stretch of writing, sometimes it's been 30 minutes at a stretch. It's gone anywhere from 3 days to 4 days to 5 days. Sometimes people write a couple of times a day, sometimes they write once a week for a month, but we're talking very short periods of writing, in this case an hour total. So it's not a huge time commitment, so I do want to emphasize that. And writers reported that in between writing, they would often think about the topics that they were examining, about these stressors or conflicts or traumas in their lives. They would think about them and sometimes even dream about them, and then bring that information into the next 15 minutes of writing. So what were the results? Well, before we do the results, let's take a look at what the standard writing instructions were for this very first experiment, and they've been brought forward to many subsequent experiments also. So the first instruction to the writers is to explore your deepest thoughts and feelings about your most traumatic experience or major conflict or stressor. And let me just add for a moment, this is not what we're going to be writing about today. We're going to take a different tactic. But these were the instructions for these writing experiments. And In looking at this traumatic experience, they encouraged writers to tie this to their childhood or to their relationships, past or current, to their past, present, future, to who they have been, who they would like to be, who they are now. So in other words, to connect it to as much of their life as they can, or as they're inspired to. The writing is confidential, and the only rule is that once you begin writing, continue to do so until your time is up. That last one, by the way, is the only instruction that we will be using when we get to the writing later on in the webinar. So these are the standard writing instructions given. And what they found is that when individuals are given the opportunity to disclose on paper these deeply personal aspects of their lives in this way, they are readily willing to do so. People don't get up and leave. They don't balk and refuse to write. They don't say it's too hard and leave. People are willing to do this, even though many report crying or being deeply upset while they're in the process of doing this during the writing or the days in between. But the overwhelming majority of study participants report that the writing experience was valuable and meaningful to them. So the expressive writing paradigm is basically that confronting the emotions and thoughts surrounding deeply personal issues promotes physical health. And I just want to emphasize for a moment, it's both the emotions and the thoughts. So it's not just ranting, getting rid of emotions onto the page, and it's not just sort of a sterile narrative of a traumatic incident that happened. It's weaving the two together. It's tying the two together into a story that makes sense to the writer. So it says here that this expressive writing paradigm promotes physical health. In this very first experiment, what they found is that after doing this expressive writing, students had reductions in physician visits in the months following the study. Participants reported using less aspirin. And participants reported just having an overall more positive long-term evaluation of the effect of the experiment, sort of a long-term lift in their mood. So since this original study in '86, there have been hundreds of additional studies that have been done and published or are still in process. And I'd like to go over what a few of those additional studies have revealed. So writing and or talking about emotional topics affects biological functioning. And I'm going to come back in a minute and say more about the talking part of that sentence. But here's what they found. So for a moment, we'll just focus on writing. So they found that writing in this way lowers blood pressure in those with elevated blood pressure, that it benefits the health of those with rheumatoid arthritis and those with asthma. Interestingly enough, they found that people with asthma started to show health benefits 2 weeks after writing. And they found that people with RA showed improved health 4 months after the writing. So there's some delays in there, and no one knows exactly what causes those. And then finally, the last bullet point is that expressive writing influences the immune functions in many beneficial ways. There have been many studies done testing this part of the immune system and that part of the immune system, and many of them show benefits. So there's all kinds of benefits to the immune function by doing this expressive writing. And let me go back, as I promised, and explain about the phrase writing and or talking. Some researchers wanted to see if there was a difference between writing about something or talking about something. So what they found is that people who wrote or who talked into a tape recorder or who talked with a therapist in a one-way interaction, meaning that they talked and the therapist only listened but did not speak, that there were comparable biological mood and cognitive improvements, just as in the expressive writing. So I want to note that that's different than when most of us go to a therapist, because a therapist doesn't just sit there and listen. A therapist interacts and helps us put facts together and gives us information. So it's a two-way conversation. So that's not really comparable to this expressive writing. But whether someone just speaks their truth or whether they write it out, those results are comparable. And let's take a look at what other additional studies have revealed. Not having to do with health per se, but again, they've looked at writing in or talking about emotional topics, and it affects psychological and behavioral functioning in the following ways. This expressive writing increases post-traumatic growth. It improves students' grades. It can lead to quicker employment after layoffs, to decreased absenteeism from work, and it leads to long-term improvements in mood and indicators of well-being, including the fact that people just report feeling less distressed in general. So I want to talk a little bit more about the increase in post-traumatic growth. Of course, there is post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a prevalent problem in people who have suffered a trauma. Unfortunately, expressive writing does not or has not been shown to decrease the incidence of post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms. However, it does increase post-traumatic growth, meaning people who suffer from PTSD find that they have more hope for the future. They feel they have more personal strength that they can count on. They have more appreciation for life, and they have decreases in negative moods from doing this expressive writing. So it doesn't decrease the PTSD symptoms, unfortunately, but there are still advantages that people find in their growth after going through a trauma. And these studies have been done on everyone from children to the elderly, honor students, business executives, maximum security prisoners, people of many ethnicities, people with many native languages, and they come up consistently with getting similar results. Why does expressive writing work this way to help our mental and physical health? It's basically still unknown. There's a lot of research that has tried to prove this factor or that factor. It's likely a very complex set of interacting factors. However, I'll just emphasize one more time, emotional expression of a trauma is not sufficient. Health gains appear to require translating experiences into language so that emotional acknowledgement can foster cognitive changes. And let me say that another way. When we can translate our emotions into words, and when we can also at the same time write a narrative, write a story about what happened, then the writer can assign meaning and coherence to the traumatic event. And then the event can be integrated into one's knowledge structures and into one's personal identity. So if a person can give it meaning and put it in its place, then it's like it can be absorbed into the personality, into the knowledge, into the life. A metaphor came to me as I was putting this slide together. This is my own metaphor, not the researcher's, so I'll take any blame or credit for it. The idea came to me is that after you've had a trauma and are suffering afterwards, it's like having loose marbles roll around in your body and psyche. You know, how can you maintain your health and maintain your mental focus with that going on? But through expressive writing, it's as if the marbles can fall into place in the holder they're meant to be in. They're not just roaming around randomly. They found a place. They've been integrated. And then your functioning can go on getting you through the days and through the challenges that come. So when they talk about the requirement to translate experience into language, that can sound like some big deal, but let me give you an example of how small it can be. There was a 1993 study, and in this study they found that after participants read a depressing story, those who were given the opportunity to label their emotions subsequently reported higher life satisfaction than those who read the same depressing story but did not label their emotions afterwards. So something as simple as identifying some of your emotions on a page of a journal, especially perhaps during a very stressful or depressing time, can actually make a significant difference. So this doesn't have to be a long-term writing project. And let's look at some of the social changes that can take place when people get a chance to express formerly held inside trauma. Another experiment that Dr. Pennebaker and colleagues did in the 80s was they took on a study of Holocaust survivors, and they asked them to tell their stories about the Holocaust. 70% reported that they had never talked about their experiences during the war at all. After the interview, all participants were given a copy of their videotaped testimony. A month later, the average person reported watching the videotape 2.3 times and showing it to 2.5 other people. So once they had some guidance and a structure, these people who had mostly never talked about this experience at all were able to look at it themselves as well as begin to share it with other people, which I find just astonishing. And disclosure opens the door to more disclosure, as that study indicated. But additional studies have shown that those who wrote about emotional upheavals talked more with others after writing than before writing. And the experiments used something called an EAR, an E-A-R, which stands for electronically activated recorder. So participants would wear this device for 2 days prior to writing, and it would simply record how much they talked to other people. Not who or not what they talked about, but just how much time they talked to other people. Then these participants did the writing, and then 1 month after the writing, they wore this ear device for another 2 days to have all of their talking recorded, and it was found that they simply talked more. They interacted more with other people after the writing than they did before. So disclosure opens these doors. People can take better advantage of social support. And then the final thing that was discovered is that with these cognitive and these social changes, at least some unhealthy behaviors abate. It's not a medical cure-all, but they did find that after this expressive writing experiment, people tended to sleep better and they tended to drink less. So the summary is that an increasing number of studies indicate that having people write about emotional upheavals can result in healthy improvements in social, psychological, behavioral, and biological functioning. So what's next, or what's happening now? What's going on now is what's called RCTs, or randomized clinical trials. These are the same trials which drug companies have to put new drugs through. They experiment with these new drugs on very large sample sizes to see how it works in the general population. So most of the studies I talked about today were fairly small sample sizes. So we'll see what the results of that are. And the reason this is moving into randomized clinical trials is just think that if for the price of a notebook and a pen, many people could have fewer doctor visits, less aspirin and medical usage, lowered blood pressure, yes, less rheumatoid arthritis and asthma symptoms, better cognitive functioning. That would be an incredibly efficient use of our healthcare system. It would be a great kindness to people who could use this benefit and free up our healthcare system for other uses. So that's where this writing research is headed. The source of this information for the first part of this webinar came from an article called Expressive Writing, Connections to Physical and Mental Health by James Pennebaker and Cindy Chung. If you're interested in reading the full article, and I found it fascinating, I have to say, it is available on the internet. Just Google the article by title and it'll come up. So that concludes the first half of the webinar. And so now let's write. So again, I hope you have your writing materials handy now. And we're changing horses in the middle of the stream. I went into all those details about the standard writing instructions, but we're going to do something different. What is set up today is not those experiments where we meet for 15 minutes a day, 4 days in a row. So we're going to use some tools today that were developed by a journal therapist named Kathleen Adams. She wrote a book called Journal to the Self, 22 Paths to Personal Growth, and she's gone on to develop the field of journal therapy and therapeutic writing. But the tools we're using today are all from her original book, and that will be listed at the resources at the end of the webinar. But again, the name is Journal to the Self, and the author is Kathleen Adams. So I want to give her credit before we get started. So our writing guidelines today, please remember that all ways are the right way. There is no way to do this wrong. And we can often hear in our head that we're doing it wrong or we're unsure, but just know that you cannot do it wrong. Follow where your pen leads. Whether you follow the instructions or whether you head off in another direction, it's all welcome, it's all correct, it's all right. And what you feel today may be therapeutic, it may have therapeutic benefits, but please remember that this is not therapy. This is writing, which can be beneficial, but it is not therapy. The writing that is done in Journal to the Self does not replace therapy or support groups or other important aids. It does have health and wellness benefits. But what happens is the writing can actually be a perfect supplement to other supports. And in addition, it can be a good path to continue when, say, a person is done with therapy or ready to move on from a support group. They can take their journal with them everywhere. So this is considered a supplement or a complement to other therapies or other supports. And there actually is one more writing guideline, which I forgot to put on your slide, and that is when we get to the writing portions, please keep your pen moving for the entire time. We'll do a couple very short writes, a 5-minute write, a 7-minute write, a 9-minute write, and it's beneficial if you can just keep your pen moving the entire time. So let's start with the first of our 5 techniques, which is short lists. Lists are fast and simple. Short lists are great for quickly assessing a situation, naming it, getting it down. So I'm going to ask you to write a short list. List 3 things that are creating unwelcome anxiety, stress, or shame in your life. These 3 things could be situations, people, events, conditions, anything that comes to your mind can go on this list. So simply list 3 things that are creating unwelcome anxiety, stress, or shame. I'm going to pause for about a minute here and just let you put together your list. Okay, I'm betting you've got at least 3 things on a list, maybe even more, and even if you've got just one particular situation listed, that's totally adequate. So look at your list and choose one item on the list that you'd like to work with today and circle it. And then I'm going to ask you to pause for a moment. You might even want to close your eyes. But think about when you're feeling this stress or this shame. When you're under the influence of this stress or this shame, how do you feel? How do you feel when you're worried or overwhelmed or anxious or whatever you're looking at today? when it is ruling you, how do you feel? And again, I'll pause here just for a few seconds and just contemplate, just experience that, please. So now, please, we'll do another very short list. Write 3 words that describe how you feel now thinking about this stressor. 3 words that describe your feelings. And again, I'll pause for a little bit. Okay, hopefully you've got some of your feeling words captured on that short list. We're going to move now to the second technique, which is called a 5-minute sprint. One of the great things about a 5-minute sprint is that most everyone can find 5 minutes in a busy day. And isn't that good news? Because most people that I talk to who like to write or would like to write more don't feel like they have a lot of time. I'm sure we can all relate to that. But in 5 minutes a day, you can actually do a worthy write. So you can take a stress break with a 5-minute sprint. And a 5-minute sprint is not some weakened version of what should be a longer write, what would be a longer write if you had the time. It's a technique that helps us get right to the heart of the matter. There's less editing, there's less warm-up, there's less throat clearing, there's a short period of time, and so we write. So I invite you now to experiment with a 5-minute sprint. So the instructions are to write for 5 minutes about the impact that your stressor or shame is having on your life. You might start out with the phrase, "the way this is impacting my life," and continue from there. And once again, write fast. That doesn't mean you have to race, but just keep the pen moving rather than pausing to think. Write fast, keep your pen moving, and write for the full 5 minutes. And for the 5 minutes, I am going to put on some music. So that will be a rising in a few seconds. You have 1 more minute to write. And please bring your writing to a close. Finish up that last thought or that last sentence. And I'm wondering how the sprint was for you. Take a minute and put your pen down and take a deep breath and thank yourself for trying this 5-minute sprint. And just pause for a minute to reflect. This doesn't have to be in writing. But if you're new to writing, if this is something brand new to you, how did it feel to take a few minutes to look at this stress and its effect on your life? And if you're already a writer, if you have a writing practice, was this similar to what you do regularly, or was this in some way different? Have you ever done a short writing sprint before? And if so, how was that for you? Was it frustrating because you could only write for 5 minutes? Or did it feel kind and protective? Did it feel insightful? I'm going to be quiet for just a few seconds and let you just reflect on how that experience was for you. And now we're going to move on to something completely different, a character sketch. The character sketches that we'll write can turn your shame or stressor into a person walking down the street. There is both whimsy and wisdom that arises naturally when we create in this way. And please note that this is something that arises naturally. When we write our character sketch, we don't have to strive for anything but playing on the paper. Now, this idea of turning your stress or shame into a person might sound completely bizarre. So please stay with me. And I think the best way is just to give you some examples of character sketches. So I'll share 3 examples with you today. This one and the one that follows are written by a woman named J. Ruth Gendler. She has a charming little book called The Book of Qualities. And she turns these qualities into people with their own personalities and quirks and charm and acquaintances and relatives and everything. So this is how she describes worry, or this is an excerpt from her writing about worry. Worry has written the definitive work on nervous habits. She etches lines on people's foreheads when they are not paying attention. She makes lists of everything that could go wrong while she is waiting for the train. She is sure she left the stove on, and the house is going to explode in her absence. The drug companies want worry to test their new tranquilizers, but they don't understand what she knows too well. There is no drug that can ease her pain. She is terrified of the unknown. So when I hear that, even though it's this whimsical portrayal, I can very much relate to my experiences of worry. Let's take a look sort of in a completely different direction, but let's look at how J. Ruth Gendler describes harmony. She writes that harmony doesn't seem extraordinary until you have known him for a while. He knows how to be gentle, and such a gentleness is surprisingly powerful. The silence around him is lyrical. If I sit in his kitchen in the late afternoon and drink ginger tea, By the time I am ready to go home, the contradictions inside my head are no longer shouting at me and trying to tear each other apart. He gives me space to be my whole self. And finally, this was the character sketch that I wrote when I was looking at one of my own stressors, which is named Overwhelm. So here's how I described Overwhelm in my imagination. Overwhelm wears a gray pinstripe suit, once nice but now tattered, shiny, and wrinkled because he sleeps in it, collapsing at the end of the day into a weary bag of bones. He runs on coffee and OJ, not allowing time for good meals. His stomach is numb anyway, and eating upsets his ulcers. At the office, in his beautiful high-rise, he greets many co-workers, though often by the wrong name. He hunches over his keyboard all day. Overwhelm is so busy, he doesn't notice his loneliness. So writing that gave me some insights into my overwhelm, that it can cover up my loneliness. So now it's your turn. Know that character sketches of feelings or stressors can be creative ways to tame those dragons. Taking charge of an emotion or a situation through personification can help poke a hole in its seriousness and scariness. So that's the point of doing this. That's why I'm asking you to take on what could be your first ever character sketch. So imagine that your stressor or shame is a character, a person with an appearance, a wardrobe, some emotions and motivations, a history of way of being in the world, some friends and relatives. Write a character sketch and be creative, and know also that your stressor or your shame might not be a person. It could be a troll, a dragon, a snake, a shark, a monster under the bed. It can be anything where your imagination takes you. So I'm going to ask you to write a character sketch. There's no particular result to get, but just to play with this and see what comes up. And just think if your stressor or shame might be male or female, young or old, large or small, rich or poor. Just start imagining what your stressor would look like as a person. I'm going to ask you to write for 7 minutes. And again, try and keep your pen moving for the full 7 minutes. Be creative, have fun. I'm going to bring some music up to listen to while you write. Write for 1 more minute. And please bring the character sketch to a close. Finish up the sentence that you're on. And I'm wondering how the character sketch was for you. Again, I invite you to just put your pen down, take a deep breath, and give yourself a pat on the back for trying that. And again, just reflect for a moment how that was. Did you feel some whimsy and wisdom and creativity come up? Did you learn something you didn't know before? Any insights, any surprises, any ideas or new possibilities? Do you feel a little more distance between yourself and the stressor or the shame that you're looking at tonight? And again, I'll pause for just a few seconds and just let you reflect on what that experience was for you. Let's move on to our 4th technique, which is a dialogue. Now that you've created a character out of your stress or shame, we'll have a dialogue with it. So imagine that you can have a conversation with your stressor or shame if you have described him, her, or it. And know in this dialogue that anything that you say will be heard, and that anything you ask will be answered honestly. Here's what a dialogue looks like. It looks just like a script. So I might begin the dialogue by asking, what's up with all this stress? What do I need to do to get beyond all this? And the stressor would reply to me, and then I would reply to the stressor. And we would go back and forth this way. Again, either party can ask questions, make comments. You can interact in any way that you want. Now, I do know that you are dealing with a shady, tricky, unreliable character here, someone who causes you stress and shame. So if a dialogue feels at all dark or scary or frightening, just imagine that there's a screen or perhaps a Dutch door in between you and your dialogue partner. Set up in your mind's eye whatever setting seems safest to you, and know that after the dialogue is over, you will step back away from this stressor again. So dialogues are best when given a little more time. So I'm going to ask you to aim to write for 9 minutes. And once again, do your best to just keep your pen moving. Let it flow where it takes you. Sometimes dialogues can feel very awkward. There might be a pause when you're not sure what to do, and that's fine. That's all part of the process. But I invite you to take 9 minutes and just have a dialogue with this stressor or this shame and just see what you learned, see what happens in this process. Once again, I will bring up some music for us while you write. Write for one more minute. And please bring your dialogue to a close. You might want to think for a final couple of seconds how you want to say goodbye to your dialogue partner. You might want to thank your dialogue partner for showing up for this process and bring that to a close. So once again, I'll invite you to put down your pen or take your hands off the keyboard, shake out your wrists. That was a 9-minute write. Thank you for giving it a try. And take a deep breath and maybe close your eyes. And again, just reflect for a little bit. How was that conversation? Did it feel a little awkward or uncomfortable or strange? If it did, that's fine. If it didn't, that's fine too. Did one partner do most of the talking? Or was the conversation equal? Again, was there any learning, insight, surprises, ideas, possibilities? And again, how did it feel to look at your stress this way? Instead of having the stress, as I described it, in the back of your head talking to you, how did it feel to be confronting it? Did you feel more distance? Was it frightening at all? Was it empowering? I'll be quiet for a few seconds and just let you reflect on your writing. Before we move away from dialogues, I just want to say that they are a multi-purpose tool in the writing toolbox. Now that you know how to dialogue, what a dialogue is, you can dialogue with anyone or anything, with people, real or imagined, with creative works or work in your life or your job, with money or objects, with your body or parts of your body, with any emotions, with parts of yourself. The imagination is the limit. So I hope that a dialogue might turn out to be a handy journal tool for you. And we're going to move now to the last technique today, alpha poems. And I know our writing has been getting progressively longer, but don't panic. I'm not going to ask you to write for 15 minutes on this one. This is actually going to be a little shorter write. And it's a very fun, it's creative play, and that's all it is. It's an alpha poem, which some of you may be familiar with. What you do is you write the name of the stressor vertically down the page. For example, on the slide, we have worry next to shame. It's best if the word is at least 5 letters, but work with whatever you've got. And an alpha poem is simply a wonderful, playful way to synthesize and capture what you've noticed in your earlier writing today. So again, I think it's easier to show by example than to try to describe an alpha poem. So let's look at worry. So again, you write the name of your stressor down the left side of the page, W-O-R-R-Y, And then you make a little poem, or whatever you want to call it, a little writing. So, for example, what me worry? Only if I forget to remember that my first response can yield to my better thought. And let's take a look at one more. Let's take a look at shame. So dark and lonely, holding it all in, allowing no one in, until I remember many are like me, and I express myself, experience freedom, and embrace others. So write the name of your stressor, of your character sketch, of your dialogue partner, of the stressor you've been working with today, vertically down the page, and write a poem in which each line starts with the next successive letter. Let your poem express your new, emerging, changing relationship with your stressor. Have fun. Don't think too much. If just the label of poem sounds intimidating, you know, it's just jotting down a few words or phrases about what you noticed today. So please take this on as creative play, not as some sort of stress or something you need to achieve. So I am going to give you 4 minutes and some music. It might not even take you 4 minutes to complete this, but I'll give you 4 minutes. One more minute. And I bet you're done with your alpha poem, or if not, just leave it where it is. Of course, you're always welcome to visit it again later. And I'm wondering how the alpha poem was for you. I hope it was fun. Sometimes new creative things put us under pressure. If that was the case, just notice that. That's okay too. Were you surprised by the results or delighted? Did it feel like any sort of consolidation or summary or reminder? Is it something you might want to post somewhere on your bathroom mirror or something? Something that you want to be reminded of the real nature of this stressor or the real power you have over this stressor. So again, I'm going to be quiet for just a few seconds and let you reflect. And please note, with all of these techniques, we all have different relationships with them. I adore character sketches. Alpha poems tend to challenge me for some reason. My mind tends to go blank. I struggle with them a little. I have a friend, and actually most of my writing workshop participants write these most amazing alpha poems on the spot. They're just full of delight and wisdom. So we all have our different relationships with the different tools. And we're going to do one final quick check-in. Write 3 words that describe how you feel right now. And again, I'll be quiet for a few seconds while you write. Thank you. And you may want to go back and look at the first 3 words that you wrote for how you described yourself when you felt under the influence of your stressor or shame, and compare them to these 3 feeling words. People often find that the feeling words at the beginning are quite different than those at the end, and sometimes they're not. There's no particular result needed, but I just wanted you to have a chance to do this little before and after check-in with yourself. So I'm wondering what your change was, what your experience was. And I invite you to continue this writing at home. You now have 5 techniques you can use in any combination: the short lists, the 5-minute sprints, or any short-timed write, character sketches, dialogues. You can play with alpha poems for all kinds of reasons. If you want to repeat this 5 writing combination, you can do it at home in 30 minutes or less. So I thank you so much for participating in this writing today. And I thank Nita for this opportunity, and I thank Ellen for bringing it all together for us.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you for this engaging webinar and for taking the time to share your knowledge and these writing tools with us. And thank you to all of you out there for joining us. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to go over some resources that you all may find helpful. The first is the Nita Navigator program here at the National Eating Disorders Association. And these are volunteers who have personal experience with an eating disorder, either themselves or in support of a loved one. If you feel like you could benefit from speaking with someone who has been through it, please email us at pffnetwork@mynita.org, and we will definitely connect you with the Nita Navigator. And we also have our PFN webinar series recordings, which you can find on our website. And there's the link to the recording links there. We also have our Parent, Family, and Friends publication. It's our quarterly magazine called Making Connections. And you can find current and archived issues on our website, including an arts-focused section. We also have our Nita toolkits, including the Parent Toolkit, the Educator Toolkit, Coach and Athletic Toolkit. They all contain comprehensive information about eating disorders, treatment options, how to support your child, insurance issues, and much more. So please check those out. NEDA's information and referral helpline, 1-800-931-2237. If you would like referrals to treatment or to talk to someone, please call. We also have a click-to-chat option if you're unable to use the phone or would like to use an alternative way to connect. Please check out Gerza Books. These are publications and books about eating disorders. www.bulimia.com is their website. We have the 2014 NEDA Awareness Week coming up, February 23rd through March 2nd. Please check out a new website, NEDAawareness.org. There's a ton of information on there on ideas and guides for participating, articles, videos, and a lot of information about eating disorders, so please check that out. And we have our annual NEDA conference coming up. This year it is in San Antonio, Texas. Thinking Big, Uniting Families and Professionals in the Fight Against Eating Disorders. We welcome everyone, and you can learn more about that on our website, and there's a link here on the slide to that. And again, as Carolyn mentioned, all the techniques that we did today, the writing techniques, are from Journal to the Self, 22 Paths to Personal Growth by Kathleen Adams. So please feel free to check that out and learn more about these writing techniques we did today. And if you'd like to find a Journal to the Self instructor or class near you, you can visit journaltherapy.com and click on the Journal to the Self button, and you will find the nearest instructor or class near you. So just want to thank Carolyn again. Thank you so much for being here today and leading us through this webinar, and want to thank all of you out there for attending Writing Through Stress and Shame, Taking Our Power Back. And if you have any ideas for future webinars, we'd love to hear them. Please feel free to let us know. You can email me directly, Ellen Domingos at edomingos@nationaleatingdisorders.org. Okay, thank you so much, and we will see you all next time. Thank you, Carolyn.